Oh no, it
You
wasn't.
know, it was
With
it was
Roger.
just a thing of the imagination. And I've my son's been telling me for years, but the nature of the way I work has generally been to not have music or not have distractions. But with certain things that are repetitive, I now put on music, but I also put on these podcasts. And, they're just wonderful stuff
My
from
my wife.
intelligent, caring
So
people.
so
My
we got our audience is streaming in
Okay.
the Zoom room now, guys.
oh
Okay.
wow, Zoom.
The Zoom room. Welcome to the Zoom room.
Welcome to Zoom room.
We are getting ready to Zoom.
How many people we got in here, Ethan?
So far we got about 46 right now.
Oof.
Probably have a few more
Keep
joining
going.
us.
Yeah. Wow. Look at all.
And
Look at all these humans.
Yeah.
yeah,
Do I
we got
get
a
to see
handful.
who's here? Let's see if I gallery view. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
that'll help.
Look at
Gallery
all
view
these.
helps.
Look at all these humans, man.
It's always fun.
Incredible. Ron Engel's here. Jeez.
Okay. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I agree with Jurgen. Show me your faces just at least temporarily would be nice.
And the
More
It
kid.
is
people
fun.
that dare to do that. That is.
Hi, Linda. Hi. Where's my thumb?
So
Hi.
So I'll get us rocking and rolling with the intro here, and then we'll dive right in. I'm sure some folks know who we're with here, but we'll get the details out of the way. So first of all, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online educational resource that also offers you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And on today's episode, we have Chris Brown, RPT. He started work as a piano
Yeah.
technician in 1977. A graduate of North Bennett Street School in Boston, he has worn many hats in his career: college technician, concert tuner, rebuilder, private customer piano care provider, and teacher. In 2005, Chris officially specialized in grand regulation and rebuilding, and as a designer, engineer, and manufacturer, started work on the tools and protocols that have become his Grandwork system, which speeds up and simplifies grand regulating. So, Chris, we're really happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Particularly this year, where quite a number of the people that are joining us I would have been able to see person to person and possibly give a hug of my gladness to see them. Here we are where we can't do that, but actually the Zoom is pretty nice. Nice to see your faces or your names, and
I'll tell you, I
it's
have
great.
very intimate meetings every single week on Zoom, and there's ways to get beyond uh, boxy domains. There's ways to get deep and intimate and vulnerable and awesome. So
Well, we'd have a hard time, it could happen in a classroom, but there would be people in the back row or standing in the doorway or something. And it, it wouldn't be as personal in some respects as this gathering.
in a way, I totally agree with you. That's why piano technicians master classes were so amazing for me. You know, you it was so vulnerable, so intimate. You were right in the face of the instructor and very close to what he or she was doing. It's awesome. It is awesome. So, my burning question for you, Mr. Brown. We've known each
Yes.
other for a long time and really respected each other and been I felt incredibly collegial with you and like you were one of the leaders in our community. And my question is, how did you get from this high end, university and concert technician to making these insane machines to, to trick out piano actions, grand piano actions? What, just
It was
give us a Reader's Digest version of that journey.
uh, both of our children had left home. One was still in college, and no, actually, they were both still in college. But a house came on the market that my wife had been in flirtation with real estate agents the 26 years, 23 years that we'd been there. And it came on a postcard, and I took a look at it and thought, wow, this has a place for me to work. It's the right color. It's like our house, except better. If I'm ever going to move, here would be an opportunity. Well, as soon as we did move, were able to purchase this house. My wife had buyer's remorse and was angry with me, but we did move. And when I moved, I got to change my shop, and I set up specifically for action work. And the stresses of that, and anyway, I ended up with hurt elbows. And a year later, I still had hurt elbows from tuning. My friend Pat Drain had been through years and years of it. So
Patrick Drain, yeah.
Yeah. It suddenly occurred to me, I have an opportunity to say no to my clients. I had two great people that had come my way, Kazuo Yoshizaki and Jardin Liu. And I offered them, and my clients were happy. Some people turned away, and I sort of wandered off into shop work, which I'd sort of dreamed of, but never quite believed in. And I went through a patch of not having an employee in my shop, which had been the case previously. And so I was left to my own devices and with my own thoughts. And it became clear there were things that really annoyed me about the way work went. And in particular, it was coming to the end of a regulation or a rebuild, and trying to solve voicing issues. I would become aware of this hodgepodge of reasons why, and the implication that really I could look at every note and find something in the hammer, in the travel, in the way the strings were. And it's discouraging and unsettling when you realize that really what you're doing is mitigating. The best I could do in that final patch of work was to mute down and even up. And so I thought, what if there was a way that I could make sure that a hammer as it struck the strings was the way I wanted it to be rather than some other way?
So let's just pause, and I'm going to go back and ask you, what were those? These are piano technicians, right? So we all are avid to know. What were the irregularities? What was that phenomenon that led you to say, well, all I can do is mitigate? I can't.
Well, so a symptom of it would be that I would have a hammer, be mating it to the strings and lifting the strings to fit its surface, which I had carefully filed.
Yeah.
And I just wouldn't be able to get there. I'd pull on the muted one and keep pulling, and I'd end up overlifting that string and creating another kind of a problem.
Right.
So it made me acutely aware of that vulnerability. And of course, there's an alternative that people employ, which is to file the hammer to fit the strings.
Yep.
But that's not ideal, because now you're changing the shape of the hammer, and you're changing the shape of that hammer relative to the ones around it.
That's right. And on a incredibly subtle, if somebody's really paying attention in an extraordinary way to the sounds the differences in sounds between note and note, then you can actually tell the difference in hammer shape and
Oh,
many,
yeah.
many
And you
things.
put the soft pedal on, and if you misshapen the hammer to fit the strings in rest position,
Yes,
it's quite possible they don't fit.
yes.
And that actually was the key to the idea that I had, which was that if the hammer could be vertical as it's striking the strings and the hammer be well filed, and then you fit the strings to the hammers, now you have the strings are level and parallel to the key bed, and you put on the soft pedal, and no matter how far in on the soft pedal you go, you have the same mating.
Because the surface of the hammer is the same, and it's not
Right.
saying,
And the thing about if the strings aren't level in this mating,
yeah,
uh, a string that is low is hit first. You'll never solve that by playing. It will compress the area of playing more than the ones around it. So you'll always have a discrepancy. 75 years later, you'll still have a discrepancy.
an attack discrepancy.
Yeah. So the other thing about that is
You're saying that the hammer, I just need to understand.
the hammer won't level the strings.
Right.
You can have a
And the
perfectly shaped
hammer
hammer.
will pack at that lower level
Exactly.
where that one string is. And so the attack formation of that string is going to be different than the other two strings, which will create some kind of weird dissonance.
Yeah. So the other thing about it was that okay. Okay, I'm going to, where I'm headed, I'll work back from it because I've forgotten the specific thing I was going to say. But one of the things I do at the beginning of a regulation is to pre-lift all the wire. And that may sound a little radical because the way I'm going to mate the strings to the hammers is by lifting the strings. And I don't want to spoil my chances for that, having that kind of a fit, because that's what the whole process is about. But if you have strings that have mated their hammer, say in the last 75 years, you've got a Steinway and somebody's been taking care of it and they're a good technician and they go through a couple of times in its life and they fit, you know, they've done some regulation, they've filed the hammers and they're doing a fitting. And what happens is the hammer comes to the strings and they go pluck, 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 and it's mute, mute, mute. What are the chances that they're going to question the stability of those three strings? Take their string hook and try them out just to see if one of them is a little bit not stable. Would any of you do that? I wouldn't.
I would not.
I would not. So, but there's a benefit to it. So if you think of an underlifted string, when you string a piano, all the strings are underlifted, and you have to settle it in and bring it up to pitch, and you settle it out on the belly, but you also settle it at the A grass and the V bar.
Right.
And it's an ongoing process. And as your piano goes flat later on and its pitch raised, thankfully for us, that process refreshes. And these variables can be overcome at the A graph or the V bar to some degree. But if you have a fit, when you go to test it, you don't change those three strings. So you've got a sleeper there. And one of the things that can happen is that you take that as your string height measurement, and it's a red herring. And so that's one of the variables that can cause you to not have a good fit when you get out to the bench.
So
to regulate.
What does the whole generation of what I call glides up regulation in this insanely controlled environment of the tool, what does that lead to? Why is that such an incredible enhancement for this final crown jewel type stuff with string mating? And, you know,
Well, part of the process is to make traveling vertical rather than parallel.
yeah.
You have a vertical array of parts that the shortest distance from rest to strike is a straight line that happens vertically. And the best bounce that you're going to have from that system is if the hammer presents a horizontal surface to the horizontal strings and wants to bounce straight back. So you've got better repetition, you've got better transfer of power, and arguably better tone. And going back to this, the strings that are underlifted, an underlifted string is like a spring, and it can sit there almost stabilizing with play, but not quite. And a very small amount of lift with a string hook, it can just move. You know, I would discover this as I'm doing my mating, that some strings would just go whoop, or some, you know, I'd be working on one and then another one I would have to adjust it and it would just go too far. Well, why was that? It was sitting there in an unstable place. And if you think of this swoop as a spring, that makes it difficult to tune. It probably affects the way the string vibrates. And there's the other end of it, which is if you lift that string too far, now you've got a bend in the other direction that is unstable. And
okay.
if you can get your fitting to be in between in that stable area, then the whole thing will last and sound better, have greater clarity and
describe the sound better.
Well, it has greater clarity. It has
clearer fundamental, would you say? Would that be a phrase you'd use?
Yeah, probably it has a better agreement in the fundamentals and also in what happens above them, probably particularly above them.
Yeah.
Question from the chat. Does that lessen false beats or create more when
well, if you overlift, overlifting can certainly create false beats. Now, underlifting, I don't know. I haven't been able to test with science any of this. This is, you know, how I picture it in my head. But I think that the tuning I end up with at the end of this process is more stable and the sound is more clear and it has more projection.
Bottom end.
So I think there's something in it. And here's another aspect of it, which is complexity and simplicity. When we're starting out, we have a simple understanding of things. And as our understanding grows, we are forced to acknowledge and witness the huge complexity of all the factors that go into from where the finger depresses the key to where the sound comes out from the piano.
It's why you stay humble if you're good.
Yeah. And so the home stretch into voicing is where the actions interface.
Yes.
It's very complicated, but anything that you can be sure of helps you simplify the thing. So if I know that my hammers at strike are vertical and I know that my travel is vertical, and it's simplified the range of things to attend to. And then when my hammers are well mated, if you go and then tune the piano after you've just done a perfect mating, do you still have a perfect mating? Likely not. So there's this place that you're headed to that has to be at pitch and in tune and well mated all at the same time.
So talk about, like in a really laser fashion, about how the regulation station gets those hammers completely in a micro measurable way vertical.
Okay. The squaring platform was actually, that was the idea that I came up with when I had this first thought that I thought would transform everything. Well, of course, it's one of 47 things that I had to do to get it to all integrate together, or more. But the idea was to get a surface over the back checks and under the tails, so that with the hammers supported at strike, so the other part of the problem obviously is to know where strike is. Strike is a three-dimensional thing. It's not just string height. It's an in and out dimension, and it's a side-to-side dimension as well as an up and down dimension. It's a point for each string in space.
Right. Like
And obviously, when you're in the piano with the hammer,
Yep.
that is where it's happening.
Yep.
And that point turns out not to be a point, but it's a sliding area. Your hammer doesn't just go vertically; it goes around a circle back toward the player, and it's rubbing into the string and bouncing and rubbing out from the string.
Because of the action of the mechanics, yes.
Yeah. So the squaring platform out on the bench, once you have your keyframe bedding, so that was the biggest thing in a way for me to solve, was how to bed the keyframe so it was actually bedded well. Because if your bedding isn't good, then no amount of what you do out on the bench is going to solve that.
But you have to be absolutely confident.
Yeah. It's not that hard to be confident, though.
No, but
you have to be willing to have a no answer in order to find that it's yes.
So you have to be confident that the dimensions that you've created on the bench with these tools and protocols is exactly what are the dimensions and the readings of the cavity of the piano, the actual key bed of the piano. So how do you, this is a question that that I've had, but I have never asked you. So I'm asking it to you now.
Sure.
What gives you your degree of certainty that you can absolutely recreate those internal conditions externally?
Well,
that's the big, I don't know, you know.
No. Proof is in the pudding. So when you do your work and you go back to the piano and it's in the right place, then you know that you did it. But you need to know ahead of time what to do. And I discovered a whole series of things that were not accurate enough in the way that we did it traditionally. So, for instance, the idea of key dip. Yeah. Okay.
Hold that thought. So I really want this to be a forum today. This guy's got massive, resources, and I'm challenging everybody in this room with me to ask a question, to get into this, to pay attention to this and say, wow, what can I learn from this if I ask a question that I have? And I want you to come up with that. And I want you to either raise your hand digitally or write the question in the chat. All you got to do is bang the chat button and write.
We got a couple questions. So
awesome.
Pat asked one before.
Anytime, Ethan, anytime.
This is cutting back a little bit, but just a quick question. Do you seat strings on the bridge before or after or both? I'm not sure whether that's
before or after what?
What? Yeah, maybe
it's part of preparation. So I would do it before my mating, if that's what you mean.
Mating the hammers to the strings. I'm sure you're talking.
And Each
And is
place that
lifting
there is a bearing
the
point.
string, is the string lifting that you're talking about, is that something that you consider part of seating the strings on the bridge? No, not really, because that's at a different part of the piano.
Well,
So
it's at the plate, and it's
yeah.
something that I do as a preliminary, and I
So
do
you
it
would do
only very moderately. I'm
okay.
not yanking on anything, because anything that's unstable will respond and just go there. And I don't want it to go too far. So I'm just going through every string with a little nudge.
So when you're doing the string lifting, so would you go to the bridge first and do string seating then, and then do the string lifting
No,
at the
no.
plate, or for the other way?
This is a question of stability,
Right.
the
Okay.
string lifting.
So it's like a different thing. You could just think of them
Well, it's a
separately.
preliminary to it, because if I
Okay.
don't do that string lifting, then I can have embedded these strings that are less stable that can show up in the tuning,
And
but
you,
not enough to troubleshoot and to know are there.
all right. So do you just go from whatever number, whatever in the bottom to whatever in the top?
1 to 88.
All right. And just a little, and what kind of a string hook do you use?
Uh, it's a traditional one, I guess. Yeah, it's
With
a T. It's a T handle.
Oh, really? With the little hook on the
A little hook on the end, or I have used in the past a bass string that I convert into a string hook.
Cool. But that's just an essential tool in your work beyond chef.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll cut into the next question here.
Please.
Let's see. This one is from Paul T. Williams. Pat was following up with Pat's question, which is about the seating of the strings. He said, I think they go together, but near the strike point is more important for the hammer mating. And then Ed Whitting said, string lifting, use a level? Do we use a level for string lifting? Or...
Okay. This is part of my process. I have a tool for leveling strings from underneath. It's my standalone string height tool. Call it an underlevel. That was Dale Prope's name that he gave me. And a virtue of that is that you can use it at strike, which is the important place for the strings to be level. And I sell this tool, and it's useful to some people, but if I have my druthers, I make the hammers and travel vertical, and then I fit the strings to the hammers. So I achieve the same thing from the other end, and I do both processes in one adjustment.
Awesome. So you're holding that thought, and we're going to come back to the how you make it vertical after we do these questions. So that's a fascinating question. So go ahead, Ethan, with questions.
Yeah, we definitely pick up the action here in the conversation. Let's see. We got David said, I think that's Dave Skolnick. Are we prepared to have an extended conversation about bridge string seating? It might take away from the main subject, but it's complicated.
Right. And you want to be moderate there as well, because you can't get a string to take an acute angle of any sort. And you don't want to. It would be in a fixed position. So you don't want a string riding up its bridge pin, but it could be riding up with the bridge pin. So you don't want the bridge pin in the air and the string in the air, and so on. In the speaking length, in an early day of my career at an institution that I will not name because it's embarrassing to me, I strung one of their working pianos, and I went to town on settling everything, because if settling a little was good, settling more was better. And I ended up with all kinds of false beats that I created with these new strings that I put on the piano. So you want to be very careful, and you don't want to create problems for yourself.
It's the great mantra of the high-end piano technician, which is sneak up on it. Be conservative, man. If you've ever lost a whole account and client and everything because you went too far in voicing, got too aggressive, or in something else?
Yeah, it's part of the art because in a way, take tuning as the example. The only way that you know that you're in the best spot is when you go past it.
Right.
You can see or you can hear where the best spot is, and then you can go back to it. Then you have to believe that the thing that you've done is taking you to that best spot, and you can test for it. But yeah, you lose your perception of the thing. So there was a question earlier on, which was that you asked, which was, how do I know about the keyframe bitting? And there is one tool that I created along the way that actually gets to sort of the nub of the whole thing in terms of the keyframe. I call it a key step. And it was actually a version of the key jack, or, we'd have a piece of hardwood that we'd bore for a machine screw and turn up the machine screw to support our end keys for leveling.
Right.
And everybody has done that, and that's been passed down to us, and it's a very useful tip. Well, I decided to make these out of plastic, and in particular put a hole in it so they would go on the key pins. And anyway, the first time I went to use it, I turned up, well, I was adjusting it to level the keys, and I had a notion that should really have struck me 30 years before or more. And
shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Somebody's requesting to control my camera. I guess I declined.
Don't worry about it. I'm not sure who that is.
So
I
where
think
was
it's
I?
China, but don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's either China or Russia.
Now these.
Oh, I know. Okay, I just want to finish answering your question.
Yeah.
So I would turn up the jack to support my level, and it occurred to me that I ought to pre-level the keys. And I attended the first of the 37 steps, and I learned this from my teachers, that cutting punchings and inserting them isn't as much of a hassle as I thought it was, particularly at the ends. So I only do it at key number 1 and key 88, but I will shim those keys up to be the height that I want. And if I'm not changing the key level, I still shim them up, because I want my straight edge to rest on those two and go all the way across the keys without touching any other keys. And then I actually use the key step in the middle on E44 to jack up its key to just touch the straight edge. That gives me the overall shape of the keyboard.
So you use punchings to jack up the end keys.
Right.
So
when I'm done, I'm done. Although, the first time I switch punchings, and I do take the top stack off to do that, I put hole punchings in instead of the cut ones.
Yep.
Or I take out the cut ones if I'm not going to be leveling, once I'm set up on the bench. So anyway, what happened was I pre-leveled these end keys, and I turned up my machine screw in my new little tool so it would just touch. And this is what made me think of it, is that I use a tap test. And as soon as it stops tapping, you don't know where you are. So you have to have faith that you've turned it up the least amount into the tap. So what you want is for that machine screw to just touch the underside of the key so that it doesn't move it up in the process of touching it. But when that happens, your key has been sitting there on the back rail and the bounce rail, and now it's touching your front rail through the key step. It's touching all 3 rails, and that key becomes a gauge for where where its keyframe is underneath it.
in other words, where it is in 3 dimensions, you just transfer that somehow. So go ahead.
It's memorized by this little key step. So when we're out on the bench, if we recreate the same symptom, we have to do it.
It's memorized, you're saying.
Well, it's memorized in the distance. It is the distance between the hardwood of the front rail and the underside of the key. That is exactly where the key is just sitting there on the back rail and the balance rail.
Right. So
So-
you're saying that key position isn't going to move, that the rails may move, but the key position won't move. Is that
Right. So out on the bench, we have the complexity of figuring out how to shim what in order to recreate this. But as soon as we've recreated that exact space, now our regulation is going to work.
Okay.
Because we're going to have the right dip, we have the right key height, we have the right rise, hammer rise from that key dip, and we can set up our strike. And I set up the strike through the hammer with a weighted kissing sample, which I can tell you about. But anyway, that gives me confidence. And the process made me realize that, you know, the idea of doing it with key dip is not a bad idea, except that we've got a flexible punching that compresses. And we have our smallest refinement of front punchings is 3/1000 thick. Well, 3/1000 discrepancy in your keyframe is a crucial discrepancy.
Yeah.
It's going to give you a knock. It's going to cause trouble as it's amplified through the system. So anyway, getting three-dimensional strike in exactly the right place. And when your hammers are at strike relative to their keyframe in the piano, if I bring it all out and make the keyframe the same as it was in the piano, now my dip is going to work the same. And my sample of strike, which I do with the hammer, is more accurate than a gauge can produce. And
So
it doesn't require any numbers.
How do you recreate exactly the keyframe environment?
Well, on the bench, you fix the position of the keyframe. And if I'm just on a bench, not the fancy bench, shim the back rail so it's stable, shim the front rail so it's stable, and has the symptom of you gently hold down the front rail guide pins, and you shim that front rail so that when you put the straight edge on top of the end keys, that middle key is just touching, sitting on top of its key step that we jacked it up with.
So there's
if
no
it's
little
too high, it will be unstable at one or both ends. And if it's too low, it will tap in the middle.
tap in the middle.
It's really, really accurate.
Okay.
You want stability in all three places.
Okay.
Should I shoot back some questions from the chat?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. All right, next one, I'm just gonna go back a little bit so we might retrace some steps, but next one was Nancy. She said, seems like an unending spiral, tune, move strings, tune, made. Each process will
Can't get there from here.
You gotta walk away at some point.
Yeah, see, I mean, you can make an argument that you cannot tune a piano, and yet we do tune a piano.
It's like Zeno's paradox.
That's a whole other thing. I have a method for tuning pianos that are similar to this, which we human beings and piano technicians in general, in particular, are really good at guesstimating. Trial and error is one of our great strengths. And, you know, we learn it from the earliest age. When we get up on our two legs and walk around, we're doing that all the time. And when we learn to tune a piano, we're doing it three-dimensionally with the tension thing and twist, and we internalize something and we use trial and error to get there.
That's right.
And
well, that's right. That's how we learn everything.
So numbers may be a help in researching what it ought to look like. There are functions for numbers, and I don't want to diminish their importance, but how many decimal places are you taking that number out to? How about when you have to convert it to metric or vice versa? You know, numbers are problematic. And you have to, first of all, decide on what the number is, and then you have to decide on how to interpret it when you get out to the other end. What if you take the number and somebody else interprets it?
Well, and it's really like we were talking about before we got on the air, Chris. It's like in one sense, numbers are a limiting story that can limit your ability to actually hear and feel the instrument. And I think don't get me started, because I could speak for 3 hours about stuff.
That's a long and interesting discussion. I mean, it also reveals another aspect of who we are as piano technicians, which comes with the territory. We are philosophers, because you're faced with something that is apparently impossible that you have to do in a time frame that is sometimes quite impossible. You know, you're given 15 minutes to do the best that you can for a concert. That's ridiculous on the surface of it, and yet you do. You imbue confidence to the player. They do a great job at their concert. Nobody notices. But the other side of that is
totally irrational.
So, as regulators, mostly we face touching things up as an extra that we either offer or we just include, and it helps. But what happens when you have the customer to whom expense is no restraint, and they've heard that you're the person to do the job and they want the job done right? Well, what is the job done right? And that is something I've had a long, hard look at, because I found myself in that position and getting to this end game where I know there are all kinds of things not quite right about what I've done. It looks perfect, but from the sounds it's making, I know it isn't perfect. And that imperfection, there's a layer of it that I can't do anything about. So how am I a clear-hearted witness to what the thing actually is, so that I can do as much as can be done with the limitation of resources that I have? But if I have no limitation of resources, there's no excuses to fall back on. How do I get it the rightest that it can be in this whole game of compromise?
Yeah. And there is no perfection.
The perfection is a balance of compromise. And there may be a series of, you could have 3 different people that arrive at 3 slightly different solutions that all.
Well, that's it. That's it. And when that piano is recorded or listened to, it sounds awesome. The thing is, when you realize that it's just different degrees of excellence, it cannot be like, this is the final end.
Eureka, we've discovered it. And it's going to be changing in the moment that you discover it anyway. So.
Exactly. It's much more like a sand painting than a regular painting. It's constantly shifting. So, Ethan, more questions, my brother.
Let's hit it. All right. So this one might take a little bit longer. I don't know, and we've been addressing it a little bit. Isn't it hard to duplicate certain things from the bench in the piano? There are no strings on the bench. Let's cover there are no strings on the bench just for one, and then we'll move on to the next question. If you want.
Okay, so there are no strings on the bench, but I've come up with a version of the traditional let-off rack that has 30 templates of various lengths, and you apply one template for each section, with the exception of a long tenor, in which often there's a little bit of a triangle there. So I use 2 templates butt jointed, and the lower edge of that template becomes an approximation of strike. But it's a very close approximation. So how do I have confidence that it is the mean or the average of that particular section? I take my samples as far out in each section as I can. That maximizes their accuracy. But I can't go right to the end sometimes because I've got my what I call bedding samples, which are with the key steps that are for each of the glide bolts, which they support the balance rail. And they're both the most sensitive and the place of greatest stability for the balance rail. And that's where we adjust our keyframe bedding from. So in front of each of these glide bolts, I have a key step. And for the two end ones, I pre-level them and then adjust the key step to just touch. But each other place, those key steps just go up and just touch their key. So I have these slices that are going to be accurate if I can achieve them out on the bench. And then I have the overall shape with the E44 that I've jacked up and the straight edge on the two end keys. The other samples that I take, and I have to take the punchings out of the bedding samples, obviously, because the key step goes in there. But I also take the punchings out of what I call strike samples because I need extra key dip to have enough follow through for, and I use a WNG weight on the end of the key because it's self-positioning and it's fairly heavy. And what I do is I back up the let off button until the hammer blocks against the string with this weight. And then I carefully turn it down until it just drops. And then I'll go and refine each strike sample so that it sort of just hesitates and drops. Then when I go out to the bench, once I've done my keyframe setup, I put the same weight on the ends of the keys. This time I'm at the end with the rack with the templates. And I'll loosen, there are two nuts for each template that hold it in place. And I'll loosen one and I'll pinch and I'll make the template so that it's blocking with the hammer with the weight on the end of the key. And I'll pinch it up until it just lets go. And I'll rough them all in and then I'll come back and I'll get them so they all just hesitate and thump. This is just far more accurate than I have a gauge, which, you know, was a big improvement on previous ways I'd done it, but I would find there'd be little discrepancies. And this does have one place where there's a discrepancy, which is on string number 3, which is the most flexible string in the scale. And I provide a little 200-gram weight that you just put on the string. It touches a neighbor string as well to balance there, as close as you can get to strike, because often, generally speaking, there are dampers in the way. But a benefit of this system also is that you check the back rail, you check the front rail with the balance rail pulled out of the way, and you check your cheek blocks first. Actually, that's the first thing that you do. And generally, you can confirm the back rail and the front rail. If you've actually got a real problem, then you have to take things apart, and there's protocols to do that. But if the way it's all put together, those check out, then all you have to do is the balance rail, and you haven't had to take anything apart, and now you can go out to the bench still without taking anything apart and set up. And that is really fast when it happens that way. If your keys need easing, well, you've got to ease them first before you take your samples. If you have things rubbing, if you've got junk on the key frame, if you've got glue drips or stuff like that, you know, you have to take care of it. But if you've got a piano that's, say, at a university that is basically in good shape or brand new, you want to sweep out the key bed, put the thing in, and you can take your samples and you're set up in no time.
Yeah. So
Cool.
when you first, two questions. First of all, when you first did this and made these incredibly precise, you know, adjustments on a piano action, what was the, you know, the artist, the client, the player's reaction?
Well, it becomes invisible to them. They were happy with my work anyway, or they were were prepared to be. But I was happier at the end. And I think they're a degree happier, but they don't get to compare the what it would have been and the what
Right.
it turns out to be. So it's ephemeral in a way. But how do you, okay, so there is a point. When you're doing this work on a bench, you've got various advantages of light and height and environment, and you don't have the customer hovering and so forth. But you have this potential disadvantage. If anything challenges your confidence in your setup, you've got the piano in another place and your action here.
Yep.
So I've taken visits back to the piano, and that's not the way the system's supposed to work, but I did it on occasion to find out that there was something odd in the piano that I hadn't noticed. And when I'm setting up on the bench, I think, this can't be. I must have made a mistake. And so I went back to the piano to confirm that the problem was in the piano. Like a back rail of the key bed that suddenly goes off on a slope. There are things on the key bed that, if you've got the rail and style set up so that they're not flush as your back rail goes over them, and they're not flush as your front rail goes over it, you can't solve that with keyframe bedding. If you've got an action that has had the glide bolts turned down and is elevated, is bearing against the dogs at the back in an upward way, you're never going to create that on the bench. You'll chase your tail and not be able to solve it. So you need to have real confidence that what you've got out there on the bench is what you had in the piano. And if you do have that confidence, then you're flying.
That's right. That seems to me to be the key to this system. Ethan, let's quickly we got time for two more, I think, through two more.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rip through the comments that are there. We'll read them all, and then we can pick out whatever sounds good. Yeah. And maybe there's some redundance. We'll see. Okay, so we've got, if I can catch up where I was. Oh my goodness, there's so many comments here. David, you really stimulated everyone to chat.
Can these be forwarded on to me when we're done?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, we could do that for sure. Okay, we got this. Seems like an underdisplay. I love the underlevel tool, even when it's not what you use now. Also have Ed Whitting strings do ride up bridge pins because whether playing in the coil and the wire or something else, seating strings on the bridge is necessary on an ongoing basis. It must be done lightly in all cases. Johann Krebs says A-graph height in the grand piano bass and mid-range sections can vary depending on the thickness of the A-graph, washers installed, or from a warp, usually upwards in the plate. Not many plates are level. Can that be accommodated by the workstation, or are final adjustments made in the piano?
Tick that one. I'd like to speak to that one when we're through the
list.
Yeah. That one. Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. David said must be sure that the frame is clamped at the ends. I've got Paul Williams saying brilliant perfection is a balance of compromise. Ed Whitting, the 15-minute concert tuning. Are you a piano tuner technician under contract to perform concert work, or are you a piano tuner that was called at the last minute to tune that piano? Don Rose,
right. That's a big difference.
I hate that the hall knows for literally months that the piano will be in use and calls me at the last possible moment. I had a drop dead contract with the local hall for a lot of years. Paul T. Williams, Don, been there, it sucks. Even with people I work with here at the university, they'll say, oh yeah, we want both pianos tuned together in the recital hall with one lid removed. Can't tell you how many times. Mike Barley, for me, using Chris's system ends up giving better results for two big reasons. One, the increased precision that the tools and protocols themselves provide, and two, increased accumulated confidence on his part. Ask about this if there is time.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was the next field I wanted to, if we had time at the very end, to talk about what it does for you in terms of, talk about confidence. That's what confidence is for, to give you more power. You have more power, humble power, better piano technician you are, the better communicator you are, the more you can just stand behind all this stuff.
Well, that was the initial problem presented to myself. How could I be sure? So now when I go to the piano after it's been prepped and regulated, and there are things that I am sure about,
So,
as sure as I can be.
right. So your experience over the past years has been you take that action off that awesome hothouse environment of your bench and your station and back to the piano, and it works like a charm.
Yeah,
That
it fits.
you travel.
So I just want to say, though, you don't need my fanciest system. You can have your own bench, some key steps, and a couple of WNG tools,
Yep.
and set up. If you look at my starter system, it gives you the tools to do it. But if you look at my starter system and you think about what you have, there may be redundancies where you can make the little steps. You can. By the way, my 4 protocols, which go into my setup and order of operations for each of these systems, they're 2 pages each. You can laminate them for checklists, or you can, they're outlines. One is a bedding protocol, one is a sampling protocol, one is the overall regulation protocol, and the other I call the alignment protocol, which is basically a review of the principles of why I do what I do and why the system is set up the way it is.
And are these materials public domain, or
They are on my website and they are for free.
wow.
You have to purchase them, but you purchase them for $0.
Okay, that's awesome. Ethan, how are we doing on time, and what do we have left? And we're pretty close to wrapping this up, aren't we?
Yeah, we got about 3 or 4 minutes. I just put the link in the chat where you can get these papers, these white papers that
Awesome.
Chris just mentioned. Yeah, and I just downloaded them the other day. You just gotta pretend that you're buying something basically and put in your email address so he can send you the documents. And yeah, we've got also just want to remind everybody that we put some links in the chat to register for next week's radio hour. We got a feedback link for this week's radio hour. We really love to hear from you and hear how things are going for you, what you like, what you don't like, how we can improve, and what's working, and also direct access. So if you want to support this project for just $8 a month, then we'll always make sure you get the direct link, way ahead of schedule, and make sure you get it before you can jump on here. And again, you can register for next week's radio hour, which will be Boaz Kirschenbaum, who was supposed to be on here a couple of weeks ago, but he was sick, and he has agreed to come next week. So that'll be fun. And an upcoming masterclass, hopefully with Del Fondrick, towards the middle to end of September. Wow. And that's actually a masterclass that we're doing. We're still deciding whether I'm going to go out there and film it live, or we'll do some alternative format. But yeah, he'll be giving a lecture in a few weeks. And we'll probably do the radio hour with him as well, and then just have a lecture after that.
I'd love to do that. Do them in conjunction.
Yeah.
Well, again, Chris Brown, wow, massive resources. We could have spent 3 hours, getting into the details of this. And the fact then that you have public domain information to help people gain the confidence, which is the most important thing, and really see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's key, really.
It is. And so our deepest gratitude to you, brother.
I just want to say that, it's so nice to be able to be in this position where everybody's listening to me say how great it is to see you guys.
Yeah.
Give you all a hug.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And thank you, our beautiful community, Pianotech Radio Hour community, for showing up and paying attention. We can, you can feel the attention in the room. and it's great. It's a lot of wisdom, a lot of simpatico, atmosphere, and I'm just so grateful.
Yeah,
So
it's really great. We had a great attendance though as well. We started out with about 45 people. We shot up past 80, and we had about 15 over on YouTube, Facebook, and so forth. So we had a
Wow.
good audience today. People
Yeah.
jumped on, so we appreciate you all being here. And also, yeah, again, thanks to Chris. And I've been noticing we haven't really got to chat, call you out, and maybe we'll be able to do this more in future episodes. But Chris has been here quite regularly, so we appreciate you,
oh,
having an appreciation for what we're doing and showing up and being a part of the community as well.
It's excellent.
loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Thanks so much.
All right, brother.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll sign us off and we'll be in touch later. So we'll see you
Okay.
on the flip side, folks.
Bye, guys.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Stay safe.
Appreciate it.
Well,
Bye-bye.
happy.